It is 0 hour 30, Universal Time. I'm Jim Tedder in Washington. European nations have expressed approval of the United States' offer to join them in talks with Iran if Iran stops its uranium enrichment activities. EU Foreign Policy Chief Javier Solana says the American statement represents the strongest and most hopeful sign in current efforts to reach an agreement with Iran. European officials say the decision also helps support an offer for Iran proposed by Britain, France, and Germany. Their foreign ministers will meet Thursday in Vienna with officials from the United States, Russia, and China for talks on the offer. Oil prices dropped Wednesday after the United States offered to hold the talks with Iran. In New York City, prices fell almost $1 to a little more than $70 for a container or barrel of oil. Prices rose recently because of investors' concerns that the nuclear dispute might lead Iran to cut oil exports. Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has declared a state of emergency in the southern city of Basra after weeks of Shiite fighting there. Mr. al-Maliki ordered the month-long emergency period during a visit to the city on Wednesday. He also said he would work to improve security and stop increasing violence. His comments came as more than 20 people were killed and several wounded in violence around the country. The dead included a sports announcer for the national Iraqi television. Police say they have found the bodies of at least 40 people in and around Baghdad. President Bush has told Afghan President Hamid Karzai that there will be a full investigation of the deadly vehicle crash and shooting involving American troops. Mr. Bush expressed his sympathy for those killed and injured in Kabul on Monday. Afghan police say at least 20 people were killed and over 150 were wounded in the accident. The United States military has started an investigation of the event. An Army spokesman says United States forces reportedly fired in self-defense after the vehicle accident caused violent rioting. Government doctors in India are returning to work after a strike that lasted almost 3 weeks. The move follows an order from India's Supreme Court. The court ordered striking medical students and doctors in training to return to work within 3 days. The court said the strikers will not be punished if they return to work within that time. The court also ordered the Indian government to re-employ doctors who lost their jobs for striking. The strikers have been protesting a government plan to increase the number of college seats saved for poor members of the country. You are listening to the news in VOA Special English. The spiritual leader of Tibet, the Dalai Lama, has again said that independence from China is not in the interest of his homeland. On Wednesday, the Buddhist spiritual leader said he is only seeking independence for Tibet to protect its culture and traditions. He spoke in Brussels, Belgium. The Dalai Lama fled Tibet in 1959 during an uprising against Chinese rule. He lives in the northern Indian town of Dharamsala. United Nations Secretary-General Kofi Annan has called for greater efforts by citizens in fighting the disease AIDS. He said increased involvement from those living with HIV/AIDS is especially needed. He said infections among women are increasing in every part of the world. And he said most countries have not made sure that young people understand how the disease is spread. Mr. Annan spoke in New York at the start of a 3-day United Nations conference on AIDS. Mr. Annan also welcomed the fact that an HIV-infected South African woman became the first person openly living with HIV or AIDS to speak to the UN General Assembly. Kensani Mavasa criticized African leaders for failing to carry out plans to fight AIDS. Chilean President Michelle Bachelet dismissed the head of the Santiago riot police Wednesday. The move came one day after officials used force against students demonstrating for education reform. Ms. Bachelet called the police action unacceptable. She also said the demands of the students were understandable, but protests continued Wednesday. Police fired tear gas and water cannon to control hundreds of thousands of students. The protests began at least 2 weeks ago and have spread to other parts of the country. The education minister has been meeting with student leaders to hear their demands. Students are demanding education reform, lower prices for bus transportation, and reduced costs for tests. An Austrian diplomat has been shot and wounded in Venezuela during a robbery attempt at the embassy in the capital, Caracas. Officials say Austrian diplomat Walter Reberger was shot in the arm Wednesday as he tried to fight off at least 2 robbers at the diplomatic center. Officials are investigating the incident. Finally, in sports news, independent investigators have cleared American Lance Armstrong of reported wrongdoing in a cycling race 7 years ago. A French newspaper had accused Armstrong of using the banned substance EPO. The newspaper said its story was based on the results of tests performed by the World Doping Agency. The Independent Cycling Union had appointed a Dutch lawyer to investigate the case. The investigator proposed the establishment of a special court to discuss possible legal and ethical violations by the agency. And now, briefly, here again is the major news of the hour. The American Secretary of State says the United States is willing to join European countries in talks with Iran if Iran stops its uranium enrichment activities. Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has declared a state of emergency in the southern city of Basra after weeks of Shiite fighting there. And government doctors in India are returning to work after a strike that lasted almost 3 weeks. And that's the news in VOA Special English. From Washington, this is Jim Tedder reporting.